Also, your voice is audible
Yeah,
to us. Your camera is. Yes, ma'am.
yeah. I want to stop this video actually because uh, it is popping up on my screen and there might be problem with the presentation. Can you switch off my video from there or
Ma'am, I would request her to do the same. So, ma'am, just give me 1 minute.
okay. Now the topic which has been allotted to me for the day is machine learning techniques. You There are various techniques that I would be discussing in this session: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, which involves clustering and association rule mining. First thing that we did, the first slide, I will begin with the famous quotations, the data and its importance. These two quotations, the first one is, you can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. What it means is that data is the main source without which we will not be able to generate any kind of information. Second saying says that information is the oil of the 21st century and analytics is the combustion engine. That means you need to have information. Just collecting of mere data. Nowadays, you can see that we are living in the era of big data. Big data, why do we call this data the usual data that we were having in the beginning? Now we call it big data. What is the reason of calling it as big data? The It has certain properties which we generally refer to as 5 V's, and now they are changing into 6 V's basically. They are velocity, veracity, variety, then value, and then variability. These are the basic properties because of which we say that the data that we have now is big data. And there are certain many reasons for data being called as big data because of a large number of devices which are into existence these days. You must have heard of IoT, right? So every time, or you might, we are living in the era of technology in which we are continuously using our smartphones, and these smartphones generate huge amounts of information per second. So the main reasons of the growth of this data are listed here. The first one is evolution of technology. What it means is that earlier we were using basic phones and now we are using smartphones. Second evolution that you can see is that earlier we were using desktops, now we are using laptops. And even after laptops, we are working in the cloud environment in which we are storing abundant amount of data, right? Then your cars are being replaced by self-driving cars. Due to the increase in technology or due to the evolution in technology, you are using continuously, we are using in social media like Facebook, Instagram, posting pictures on it, posting text on it, right? And retrieving certain comments on that. So this data, if we collect, it comes in the part of zettabytes. Now it is not termed as in, or it is not measured as of in gigabytes, or you can say terabytes. Now we are measuring data in zettabytes, and maybe after some time it is yottabytes. Will be measuring it. So according to IDC, which is the International Data Corporation, the world's data will grow from about 29 zettabytes in 2018. This was the statistics, to 175 zettabytes by 2025, which is about 66% the growth. And this data, which is given by IDC, is generally correct. As per the statistics of this year 2020, we had already we have already reached 50 zettabytes of data, and which is very much correctly predicted by IDC, which is very well predicted by the statistics of IDC. The second reason for the evolution or the growth of data is the increase in the IoT devices. IoT devices, now if we talk about, we have home automation system, or we are talking about smart cities. How are these things working? These things are basically working with the help of sensors. These sensors are continuously gathering information, and on the basis of this information that they receive, they are sending certain actions to us. So per unit interval of time, lot of data being generated by this IoT devices, and it is expected that by the end of the year, this 2025 will be having, by 2020 we have almost reached 50 billion IoT devices, and which is expected to increase by approximately 50% more by the year 2025. So you can imagine that how vast the data will be, right? Then the third most important reason for the increase in the data is the increasing use of the social media. Nowadays, we have seen even a small child is aware of the social media. We are aware of the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter data. We are continuously posting things, photos on it, videos on it, uploading them and downloading them. So this is basically data which is being generated at a continuous rate. Then there are various other factors also, like you can see that there is application, or there's a tremendous amount of data which is being generated from the banking sector, from the retail sector, from the transportation sector. All these, we have seen that it is in the process, or most of the government organizations have been converted into this soft form in the sense that they have been converted into computer, they have been converted into files and so on, so that we are able to analyze this data. Now, it is not a habit that this data is being converted into soft copy, or it is being converted into in the form of files for just sake of a habit, or just for the sake of the instruction being issued by the government. We are doing this in order to predict something, or get something special out of it, or get some information out of it. This is the main reason why we want to make this data that is being evolved to thousands of devices. We want to make this data as secure as possible, so that we are able to make future predictions. The markets are able to make better predictions, and henceforth they are able to grow and gain more profit out of the organizations that they have set up. Now, these are some other sources of data. You can see that Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., etc. So the same which I have explained here in pictorial form, you can see here that these are the various other sources of data. Then I will not describe much about the types of data, because I will not deviate from my topic. My topic is basically machine learning algorithms. So I'll just, by giving an overview, after giving an overview about what data is and how the data is generated, I will move on to the algorithms. I have attended the FDP sessions which were held before, and I have seen that in the first session only Dr. Rajiv Srivastav has told you a lot of applications about machine learning and AI, right? And Dr. S.P. Tripathi has given you a brief overview about data and what type of data are possible, what is meant by the quality of data, what is meant by data pre-processing, all these things, and how do you find a correlation between the data. So all these things have been briefed to you by Dr. Tripathi. So I'll just give you a brief of what this data, when we are talking about, which is being generated at tremendous rate, what can be the various forms of data. Your data could be structured, it could be semi-structured, quasi-structured, or unstructured. Structured data, we all know, till now we have been using data, or most of us are aware of structured data. You have, when we, you must have done database management system, where we talk about relational database system. So when we talk about relational database system, those databases are mostly structured. Why they are structured? Because they are following a certain pattern. Certain pattern in the sense that you have certain rows and you have certain columns, and hence you are easily able to read the values and interpret the values, right? So data which has having a certain kind of structure, which is in the tabular form, which you can represent by means of spreadsheets, right? That database is called as a structured data. Second, I come to unstructured data first. All the data which is not structured can be termed as unstructured data, right? For example, if I ask you to give a feedback of this faculty development, as you are being asked, you have to give the feedback of this faculty development program. So one of the possible ways is that they give you certain criteria on the basis of which you have to mention yes or no, or you have to mark tick or wrong, whatever, right? So this is one method of of performing a survey and getting the feedback of this FDP. Now, what if I want to get the real insights of this FDP? That what did you gain from this FDP? Then in that case, you will have to write certain paragraph, or you will have to write certain lines on it. So that kind of data becomes your unstructured data, right? So that data becomes your unstructured data, and most of the almost you can say 80 to 90% of the data that is being generated these days is unstructured data. We have very less amount of structured data. For example, you can see that the comments which are being mentioned in the Facebook, or they are mentioned to Twitter, they are in the form of the paragraph. They are not following any particular kind of structure. So that data is called as unstructured data. That is an example of unstructured data. Then we come on to semi-structured data. Semi-structured data means data is structured as well as not structured also, right? So when we talk about semi-structured data, what it means exactly is that for example, if I say photograph, a photograph is a form is an image, right? Or a video is an image. So it is in a form of unstructured data. But if with that photograph I associate a timestamp, you must have seen that when you click a photo on your from your mobile these days, you get the timestamp that at what time the particular photo was clicked, by which phone this photo was clicked, and certain other information. So device, it is device stamped, it is time stamped. So such kind of data is referred to as the semi-structured data. Another example of the semi-structured data is the usual emails that you must have seen. The emails that we send, they are mostly in the form of the paragraphs. So that is a form of this semi-structured. It is your email text is unstructured, right? But along with every mail, you have associated with it who is the sender, right? Who is the receiver of this mail? Who will be the receiver of this mail? Then what is the time on this that this mail was sent? So such kind of information, basic information, is associated with each and every mail. So this data becomes it becomes an example of your semi-structured data, in which you have certain amount of unstructured data which has been appended with certain information which is in structured form or which is in fixed form. So such kind of data is referred to as semi-structured data. Lastly, we have quasi-structured data. Quasi-structured data, an easy example by means of which you can understand quasi-structured data or differentiate from the other forms of data, is that when we search for a certain, say, product on Amazon or some particular app, when you search for that, so what is the order in which you traverse? What is the order in which you traverse the web pages? That forms your quasi-structured data. It follows a certain erratic formats are followed by the quasi-structured data, right? So most, we are not basically much concerned about the quasi-structured, but you can say that in if we can classify all these forms or combine them into two parts, structured and unstructured. Where structured you have the relational databases, or you have the Excel spreadsheets, and in the unstructured you can have semi-structured, quasi-structured, and unstructured data. So this is how we can classify the different the data which is being generated by a large number of sensors, a large number of IoT devices, a large number of mobile devices or the smartphone, etc. Now I come to the main topic that is being given to me, is machine learning and the various algorithms which run behind it. So this term was first coined by Arthur Samuel and started in 1959, and it is a subset of artificial intelligence. I would emphasize on this. See, there are three basic terms you must have heard, and they are in name these days, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, right? So they all these three are not the same. Machine learning and deep learning, both of them are subsets of your artificial intelligence, right? artificial intelligence means something we are making in order to make a system intelligent so that it can work as if a human being is working, right? So machine learning is one subset. We'll not be discussing deep learning in detail, but we'll come to deep learning when we talk about neural networks. So here I talk about machine learning. So here machine learning is basically, as the name suggests, it is the task of making a machine intelligent so that it performs like a human being performs. Right. So machine learning focuses on the development of computer programs that can access data and it can use it to learn for themselves. So instead of us writing the code, what we do is that we feed humongous amount of data to the generic algorithm, and the algorithm builds the logic based on the given data. Right. So here the primary aim of this machine learning is to allow the computers to learn automatically without human intervention or assistance and adjust accordingly. You can correlate this machine learning with the normal learning. How do we learn? How do we learn a specific thing if we are asked to learn it and present it the very next day? How do we do it? We do it by practice. We read it multiple number of times till the time it is in our brains, right? Similarly, machine does not have a brain, but it is our task that by means of the algorithms and by means of the data, we have to make it intelligent. We have to make it intelligent so that it is able to perform certain decisions on its own without any kind of human intervention, right? So learning, now the thing comes that why at all do we require learning, or why do we require machine learning, right? There are certain areas where human involvement is not possible. For example, if you have to traverse the moon, it is not that easy. If you have to travel, you have to go inside a volcano, it is not possible. But by certain sensors, by use of certain sensors, by means of certain devices which we can make intelligent so that they are able to fetch data from these difficult points, right? We make the machine intelligent, make design the machines in such a way so that they are able to perform the task where humans fail to perform. One of the reasons for machine learning or making a machine intelligent is that it should be able to perform tasks where human intervention is not possible or humans are not able to go. Then second reason of that why learning is important is that it gives the algorithm the experience which can be used to output predictions for new unseen data. Experience also helps in optimizing the performance of the algorithm. Now there are certain examples that by means of which you can understand this machine learning. For example, have you ever shopped online? So while checking for a product, you notice that it recommends. Now, most of you must have used these famous apps like Amazon. You must have used Grofers or Big Basket or Flipkart, right? These apps you must have used. So you have seen that whenever you search for a particular item, you see it, and but you're not interested in buying it at the moment, so you stop it and you go to another page or start some other activity. Then the other time you log into your device, same device, what it gives you, it gives you recommendation on the same kind of things that you searched in the previous term. How does the device know, or how does it give you the same kind of variations of the same kind of product? So that is by means of the by use of the machine learning. The machine reads, it notices, it learns from your clicks that you have done, that you were searching for a particular product. Now it gives you certain recommendations on the basis of that, right? Now next example is that you generally get calls from this bank, or you get calls from the finance company to take loans or insurance policy. So it is not the case that they are giving calls to all the customers who are there in the bank. They will not obviously give calls to person having a 10,000 amount in his bank, right? So it has to make it the system has to be intelligent enough to understand that who are the legitimate people who are the target customers who can take the loan from the bank, right? It makes a call only to those persons, and this is where again the role of machine learning comes into existence. Then we have seen, most of you must have used Google Assistant is there, which is a voice recognition system on the basis of which you give certain inputs and it gives you the answer to the obvious questions. Then you must have used Alexa. Then Siri is for the iPhone. It's a voice recognition system. If you ask Siri what the temperature for the day, it will fetch. So there is some NLP, natural language processing, involved in these voice recognition system, by means of which they are able to understand your text and convert it into the machine language, and then after they understand what you are asking, and on the basis of that they extract certain information. Now another thing with these applications you must have seen is that they keep becoming more and more efficient as you keep using them, right? Why is it that they become more intelligent with time? Because as you keep using them, you are providing them with the database, you are providing them with the more of the data on which they learn or they train themselves. And as they keep training themselves, they improve their performance over a period of time. Another example of machine learning is the Google Maps that we generally use. If you have Bing Maps, you have Maps.me. Here we go. These are certain applications which let you predict the correct path that you have to follow. If given a source and destination, they will fetch you the correct path that you should follow, in which there will be minimum amount of traffic. Now, how are these traffic predictions done? Now, on the basis of, they may be on the basis of the historical data which is there, that on a particular time of the day there is so much traffic in this particular area, and this is one way by means of which they can give their prediction. Another way of giving the prediction, another method that they use generally for predicting the traffic in the particular area, is by means of the sensors which are giving them the data that this particular place is crowded at the moment, so you should follow some other path, right? Then another example of machine learning is social media personalization, which we have already discussed, that Facebook, and you have seen that in Facebook, when you click Facebook, one feature that we can consider as a good example is that when you upload certain picture on Facebook, say I upload a picture with 5 of my friends. So Facebook has this privilege, or this you can say this technique of image recognition, that it will be able to identify your friend who is there in the picture, and on the basis of it, it will give you certain it will ask you question that do you want to tag these people. So it is a good uh, face recognition system, or you can say the image recognition system that is being developed by Facebook, which allows you to do auto tagging. It will recommend you the names of the persons who are there in the picture, and accordingly you can directly add those people. Then email spam filtering. You must have seen that in your Gmail, almost every one of us has a Gmail account now, or any other account. You have the inbox, and also you have the spam box, in which in the inbox we have the daily mails which we regularly read and work upon it, and in the spam box we have mails which are, you can say, they are generally not used by us, or they are not replied by us, right? So it has the capability, Gmail has the capability of differentiating between the spam mails and the non-spam mails. It builds a separate folder for the spam mails, so that we are not we are not seeing these unwanted mails in our inbox and get disturbed by it. So this is another property of where application where machine learning is involved, by which it is able to differentiate between the spam and the non-spam mails. Then you have online fraud detection, like the identity detection, fake accounts, man in the middle attacks. Man in the middle attacks means that when we are doing a transaction, in between there is some middleman who uh, hacks the thing and does certain kind of attack, or does take certain amount of money laundering is there or whatever. Then you have stock market trading, in which you have predictions about the daily stock market on the basis of which you can buy or sell your shares. Then assistive medical technology. Now machine learning is being extensively used in the medical applications for diagnosis of certain disease. One of my students is working on arrhythmia, detection of arrhythmia disease, and then you can have a cancer detection at the early stages by means of this machine learning through the MRI images. MRI images are basically mainly being used for the scans can be used to detect that where a particular kind of tumor is likely to occur on the basis of some other symptoms which are provided by the patient, and you can predict a particular disease which might occur in a human being, and on the basis of that you can make or you can use certain remedies, right? Then you have automatic translation. Automatic translation means supposing I am in city, I go to Kolkata or I go to some other place out of India, so where I am not able to understand the language of that place. So in that case, we can use the feature of automatic translation. So there are two ways. One way is that we can scan the image of whatever is written, and the Google will automatically translate that into a language which we give. Another way could be if someone is speaking and we are not able to understand his language, then it is by means of the voice. Then a famous application which I have not mentioned here, I had mentioned here, is the uh, Tesla self-driving car. It is basically a uh, driverless car in which this car learns by means of the human actions, by means of the actions taken by the human driver while he is driving. So these are some of the prominent applications of machine learning. I will not go into more details of the application because it has already been done and I will miss on with my algorithms otherwise. Next slide. This slide basically represents the difference between the traditional learning and the machine learning, right? Now in traditional learning, when you write programs in any language, say C, Java, what we do is that we give data and we give program to the computer and we expect certain output out of it. This is the traditional approach that we follow till now. Now in machine learning, what we do is that there is no explicit programming. What we are doing is that we are giving data. Huge amounts of the data is being given to the machine, and also we give output to the machine and it generates a program on its own, and this program now is able to give the output for any new data which we are inputting to the machine. How it does, we will discuss in the later on slides. Now this is the general model for machine learning. This is general model for machine learning. You have the training data. You train this machine with the help of the machine learning algorithm. There are several algorithms which we'll discuss. Those algorithms, by means of those algorithms, you train the data and you develop a model. You develop a model for this machine learning algorithms on which you have trained the data. And this will make certain predictions now, right? Now, when we give certain new data, so this data can be called as a test data, or it is certain new data that we are providing to the machine. We input to this algorithm and it makes certain predictions. So if it makes correct prediction, then your model is said to be a successful model. Now, these are the basic classifications of the machine learning algorithms, which we'll be discussing in detail. Machine learning is basically classified into three types of algorithms: supervised algorithm, unsupervised algorithms, and the reinforcement algorithm. In supervised, you have two kinds of problems, mainly classification problems, and you have the regression problem. In regression, algorithms may be linear or non-linear. Then you have decision tree for performing classification. You have random forest for performing classification, and the other classification algorithms are KNN, that is the K nearest neighbor, trees, logistic regression, naive Bayes, and the support vector machines. In unsupervised learning, we mainly have the clustering algorithms, which are SVD, PCA, principal component analysis, and the K-means. Then you have association rule analysis, which includes a priori algorithm and the FP growth algorithm. Also, you have the hidden Markov model, And this model is also used in the reinforcement learning. So this slide shows you the machine learning algorithms and the types of variables that they work on. These variables have been discussed in detail in your first lecture by Tripathi sir. So we'll not go into the detail. Machine learning types, it is supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, and reinforcement. One more type which I have not included in this diagram is the semi-supervised, and we do not have separate algorithms for semi-supervised learning. Instead, it is a combination of supervised learning algorithms and the unsupervised learning algorithms which are used here, right? So that is why I have written there supervised, unsupervised, and the reinforcement learning algorithms. Now, supervised learning algorithms which work on continuous target variable are regression, and which work on categorical target variable is the classification. The technique that we employ here is classification. Now, what is meant by continuous and categorical variables? Categorical variables are basically variables, for example, if I say that, if I talk about the age of a particular person, if I mention the age in numbers, if I say 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 75. So these details, if I give, so these are numbers. These are real numbers which I am inputting. So this kind of numbers are your basically referred to as continuous variable or target variable. Continuous target variable, right? But when I talk about categorical variables, in that case, what I will do is that I will discretize this age variable, right? I can classify it as age should be less than or equal to 30, it should be in the range of 31 to 50, or it should be greater than 50. So I have categorized the age into three parts: less than equal to 30, 31 to 50, and greater than 50. And when I talk about numbers particularly, it becomes a continuous variable. So when you have continuous variable and you need to make certain predictions, we make use of the regression algorithms. And when you have categorical variables and you have to make certain predictions, then we talk about the classification algorithms. Then in unsupervised learning, you have target variable which is not available. That means you do not know whether it is a continuous variable or a categorical variable. Since in unsupervised we do not have any information about the data, in that case we use clustering and the association rule mining. Then again supervised, semi-supervised, you have classification and clustering for categorical variables. Reinforcement again, categorical variable, target variable not available, control, and here you use classification. Now the first type of algorithms that we talk about is supervised learning. Supervised learning, as the name implies, that means there exists a supervisor. There exists a supervisor for training a machine. Now, in general, when we talk about machine learning, there are basically two phases involved in it, right? One phase is referred to as the training phase, and the other phase is referred to as the test phase. What we do in the training phase that I have shown you in the model is that basically we train the machine on the input data which is provided by the user. In the test phase, what we do is that we test whether how the machine is performing, how your machine is performing. It is tested on the basis of the test data which is given to it in the testing phase after your machine has been trained. So if in the test phase your machine gives you a sufficient amount of accuracy as desired by the system, right? So we say that the model is successful enough or it is good enough to perform. However, if the accuracy that you get after the testing phase is not sufficient, so if I get 40% of efficiency, that 40% of the predictions which are made by the machine are correct and the rest of them 60% are incorrect. In that case, what we do is that we go back in the training phase and we train the machine with more amount of data so that it gives accurate predictions or it reaches a good amount of accuracy. Now, when we talk about supervised learning, in that case, the data which is given to us is in the labeled form. Data is labeled. Labeled in the sense that output is known to us, right? This you can understand by means of this example, simple example which I have given here, that you have this input data, this data which you are providing to the machine, right? You can see that it is a group of square, triangle, and hexagon. So the labels here are triangle, square, and hexagon. This data we are providing to the machine, right? We are providing this data to the machine. It is making certain prediction that it is a square or it is a triangle. Then this is your test data, which is comparatively smaller in size as compared to your trained data. This is your trained data and this is your test data. Now, if I give the test data to the machine learning model that I have built, and it gives you the output that this is a square and this is a triangle. So it gives a good amount of accuracy, or it makes correct prediction. That means your model is good enough to work, right? So this is how your supervised learning algorithm works. And this is what is meant by labeled data. That means the output is known to us and we are in the search of getting the correct output for the test data set. Generally, the ratio that is used for this training and test data is 80% of the data set that we have is used for training, and 20% of the data is used for testing phase. 80% and 20%, it is user dependent, but still most of the time the ratio that is used for training and testing is either 70-30 or it is 80-20% that we use for training. There are several repositories from which this you can get the data set, and you can work upon your projects. Is You have the UCI machine learning repository, from which has a large amount of data sets which are available in it. Yeah, related to all the fields, be it automobile, be it the manufacturing industry, be it your medical data. Lots of data is available in this UCI machine learning repository. Also, you can get good amount of data sets from kaggle.com, and there are very many other repositories that you can search. So this is the basic for this supervised learning. Then we come to unsupervised learning. As opposed to this supervised learning algorithms, in unsupervised learning algorithms, your data set is not labeled. That means you have this data set, you have only this kind of data set, but you do not have the labels, you do not know the outputs, what the output will be, right? So it allows the user to perform more complex processing tasks as compared to your supervised learning. In unsupervised learning, the data set is not labeled, and once the model is given a data set, it automatically finds the patterns and relationships in the data set and create clusters. For example, this is the data set that we have given to the machine. So what the machine will do, based upon the features of this data, it will extract certain features from this data set, and based upon the features, what it will do is that it will group this data set, or it will classify this data set into different groups on the basis of identical features. Just like you have the saying that birds of the same feather flock together, or you can say that the people of the same interest sit together. So similarly, in here also this technique will be adopted, that all the elements or the data elements which are having the identical kind of features, they will be coming in one cluster. Another rest of the elements will be coming in the other cluster. So this is where we you in unsupervised learning, we mainly make use of the clustering algorithms. So you can see that provide the machine learning algorithm uncategorized, unlabeled input data to see what patterns it finds. And second step is observe and learn from the patterns the machine identifies. So you can see that the machine, what it has done, it has made a group of cats and a group of dogs based upon the features, how the eyes are, how the these ears are. Based upon these properties, what it has done is first it has done feature extraction, and then it has classified them into different groups. So types of problems to which it is suited: clustering and anomaly detection. Then next is your reinforcement learning. Now, reinforcement learning is basically a feedback based machine learning technique, right? in which you have the agent and you have an environment. Now the agent will learn on the basis of the reactions given to it by the environment, right? So it is feedback based. If you perform a good step, or if you if the agent will be rewarded with certain reward points. For example, this reinforcement learning is basically used in game playing, or it is used in robotics, etc. What it does is that if I make a good step which is towards the winning part, I gain certain rewards. On the other hand, if I make a wrong step, what I do is that certain reward points, or if I am penalized for it, or certain reward points are deducted from my account. So this is how reinforcement learning works. It is on the hit and trial method. The agent is basically learning from the environment, and it is making certain actions, and on the basis of the actions that it performs, it is either rewarded or it is penalized. So in reinforcement learning, the agent learns automatically using the feedback, like unsupervised learning. Since there are no labeled data, so agent is bound to learn by its experience only. So this, you can see that this is the environment, this is the agent. It takes certain actions on the basis of the environment. It either goes to reward state or it goes to a penalized state. This is another example which is easy to understand the reinforcement learning. I input here an apple. It's either response, it's a mango. So it's wrong, it's an apple. The feedback is given, right? It's noted. And then when you input this, it gives you the output that is an apple. So it's a reinforced response which is based upon the feedback which is given by the supervisor, which is given, or this response is basically not given by the supervisor, but here it is in terms of the reward points which are given by the machine, or which is given by the system. Then you have the semi-supervised learning. In this type of learning, the algorithm is trained upon a combination of labeled and unlabeled data. So as I told you, that semi-supervised learning makes use of the supervised and the unsupervised learning algorithms. So that means here you have labeled data as well, you have unlabeled data. So on the basis of unlabeled data, what we do is that we can apply clustering algorithms and get labels out of it. And then you have the labeled data also, on the basis of which now all your data after the clustering on the unlabeled data is labeled. So once this is, and the other set is already labeled, so you can apply classification algorithms into it, and then this is how you can train your machine. Then practical applications of semi-supervised learning is the speech analysis. Since labeling of audio files is very intensive, semi-supervised learning is a very natural approach. Then you have internet content classification, then protein sequence classification. These are some of the application of the semi-supervised learning algorithms. Now, after discussing these you can say four main types of algorithms which are there in machine learning, we go into the details of the various algorithms which come under supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. With supervised learning algorithms are basically classified. The problems can be classified into two types. First is the classification problem. Second is the regression problem. Classification problem, when you have discretized output, when you have categorical output, then your problem is said to be a classification problem. When you have to make certain predictions on a continuous variable, then you use the regression method for it. The list of the common algorithms which are used in supervised learning are the k-nearest algorithm, naive-Bayes, decision tree, linear regression, support vector machine, and the neural network. Now I have just explained, since there's a time limit to this FDP, so I have just explained by means of simple example that what these algorithms mean. I have not gone much into the mathematical details of it, otherwise one algorithm will take 1 hour at least. So first one is the k-nearest neighbor algorithm. It is used for both classification as well as regression algorithms. It is based on learning by analogy, that is by comparing the given test tuple with the training tuples that are similar to it. So you can understand it by means of this. Instead of reading this theory, we can understand it by means of this example. Supposing you have this data set which is given to you. You have stars and you have triangles. Now this is a new example which is given to you to classify. that whether it will lie in this class A, red ones signify class A and the green ones signify class B. So what we do is that we find the distance of this new sample from all the points which are existing, from all the data points which are existing. Now there are various ways of finding out this distance. The simplest you can use is the Euclidean distance. For example, we have 2 points x1, y1 and x2, y2. The Euclidean distance between them will be x2 minus under root of x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square, which you all must be knowing. Other distance measures are your Manhattan distance, then you have Minkowski's distance, right? So what we do is that we find the distance of this new point from the existing data samples, right? Once you have found out the distance, you can make a table and then the value of k. What is this k in the k nearest algorithm? This k will be given to you. Supposing I do 1 nearest algorithm, value of k is 1. So the minimum distance, supposing the minimum distance is this to this red one. So what is the class of this star? It is class A. That means this point will belong to class A. Right? If I say k is equal to 2, what will happen is that suppose the two minimum, I find, then I extract the first two minimum distances from the distances that I've found out. Right? Supposing this is one distance and the second minimum distance is this. So in this case, you see there is a tie. This element can belong to class A and it can also belong to class B. So this problem will always occur when you take an even value of k, right? When you take an even value of k, this problem will always occur. So generally we take an odd value of k to differentiate or to find out the exact class, right? If I take a value of k as 3, say, so this point is close to this point, it is close, the three minimum distances supposing are these three, 1, 2 and 3. Now what happens is that one element belonging to class A, another two belonging to class B. That means this element will belong to class B. This is how your k nearest algorithm will be working, which has been depicted in these three diagrams. I hope it gives you a little bit idea as to how this k nearest algorithm can be employed. Then the second algorithm that we have is the Naive-Bayes algorithm. Now, Naive-Bayes is basically a statistical classifier which is based upon the concept of conditional probability. Conditional probability, that what does conditional probability mean? That the occurrence of a particular event is dependent upon the existence of some other event. It is condition based. So if this happens, then this will happen. If else kind of statement is there, right? Dependency is there. So it is based upon the Bayes theorem with an assumption that the predictor attributes are independent of each other, incremental in nature. Each training example can incrementally increase or decrease the probability. What it means is that as we increase the size of the data set, right, the predictions will change because the data set will intensely affect the output which is being given by the machine, right? So now here a little bit of mathematics is involved. So this Bayes theorem can be stated like this. Suppose we have a training set capital D, right? If I say we have a training set capital D, there may be thousands of tuples of data set in which are having certain attributes. These attributes I have mentioned as x1, x2, so on till xn. That means n attributes are there in each particular training data sample that we have taken. And this data set can be divided into, say, m classes. M classes are there, C1, C2, Cm. So classification, it is again a classification algorithm. We are still dealing with the classification algorithms only. So classification is to derive the maximum posteriori, that is the maximum value of PCI upon x, which is by Bayes theorem given as Px by Ci into probability of this class Ci upon the probability of x. PCIX is this. So this mathematical detail, you are already aware of the Bayes theorem. It's a very basic theorem, and the conditional probability also everyone knows. So since here we assume that this term px will be constant, so the classification mainly is dependent upon the numerator. That means PCIX is equal to PXCI upon PCI. This can be illustrated by means of this example that I mentioned here. So here there are certain attributes like age is there, income is there, student is there, the credit rating is there, on the basis of which you have to predict that whether this person will buy a computer or he will not buy a computer. So one more thing that I want to specify here is that when we are talking about supervised learning, you have the target variable, you have the labeled variable or the target variable. So here I am saying that on the basis of these features are also known as predictor variables. Age, income, student, and credit rating, they are also known as the predictor variables. And this class or labeled variable is also known as a dependent variable because its value is depending upon these four attributes, right? So on the basis of this, you have to predict the value of this. So there are basically two classes here. Bias computer will be yes or bias computer will be equal to no. So I find out the probability of yes, find out the probability of no, and you have to tell whether this X will buy computer or no. No, you have to predict this. A person aged less than equal to 30, income medium, student is a student, credit rating is fair. You have to predict what will be the value of bias computer, whether he'll buy or not. So what we do is that we take attributes from here one by one, that age is less than or equal to 30, given bias computer is equal to yes, what is the probability? Age less than equal to 30, bias computer is equal to no, what is it? Similarly, for the second attribute, income is equal to medium. So if income is medium, what is the probability that he'll buy the computer? He'll not buy the computer. And if student is equal to yes, what is the probability he'll buy or not buy? Credit rating fair, he'll buy or not buy. We find out these conditional probabilities over here. Now, in order to find out for the entire this test tuple that we have taken x, what we do is we multiply the probabilities, the yes probabilities which are there, and we multiply the no probabilities which are there. Then we do px by ci into probability of yes and px by ci into probability of no. So whichever one is the higher probability corresponding to whichever class, that will be the class of this x. So this is how your naive Bayes algorithm functions. It is basically a classification algorithm, and it is based upon the concept of conditional probability, and it the size of the data set matters a lot when we are talking about the naive Bayes algorithm. As the data size increases, the predictions become more accurate, and this is the case for almost all the machine learning algorithms that we deal with. Then the next algorithm which we use for classification or supervised learning is the decision tree. It is a supervised learning algorithm that is commonly used for. Now you can consider the same data set. I can consider the same data set. I have not made, again, this algorithm is also involves a lot of mathematics, as because if you are having say 4 attributes here and one labeled attribute, you have to make a decision tree out of it. So first thing is, you all know what is a tree. So decision tree obviously will be like a tree. So first thing is that we have to decide upon what will be the root of the tree. So amongst these 4 attributes, amongst these 4 predictor attributes, you have to find out which of the attribute can be considered as the root attribute, right? For this purpose, you have to find out there are certain parameters, or there are certain measures which are involved in finding out the best splitting attribute. You cannot haphazardly take or randomly take this age as the splitting attribute, or income or student or credit rating as the splitting attribute. You have to uh, find out certain mathematical numbers on the basis of the information gain, or you also have the measure of Gini index to decide upon that which attribute can be considered as the best splitting attribute. So first is by finding out the information gain. The information gain measure involves the information gain measure involves finding out the entropy of each and every attribute. So for each attribute, we first find out the entropy, and also after finding out the entropy, we find out the information gain. So it is information gain is basically the measurement of changes in entropy after the segmentation of the data set is based on the of a data set based on the attribute. Segmentation of a data set based on the attribute. What it means is that if I talk about this data set, so if I say less than equal to 30, so how many, if I consider age as the splitting attribute, how many classes of age are there? There are three classes of age you can see: less than equal to 30, 31 to 40, and greater than 40. So these, on the basis of these classes, you will find out the entropy, and then you will consider the attribute which is having the maximum amount of information gain. Same procedure you will do for income, same procedure you will do for student, same you will do for credit rating, right? Once you have found out for all the attributes the information gain you have found out, you will take the attribute which has the highest information gain to be the best splitting attribute. Accordingly, you will split this tree. A simple example could be this, that if the salary is between 50,000 to 80,000, yes, there could be two classes. Yes, it is greater than this, in this range, or it is not in this. If it is not in this range, we decline the offer. This tree is basically for whether the offer should be accepted or not based upon certain features. The features are salary, whether it is near to home, whether it is providing the cab facility. So as opposed to this example, here what are the you can say what are the attributes, predictor attributes? First is salary, then the office is near to home. The third is whether it is providing the cab facility, and the classes are whether the offer will be accepted or it will be declined. Right. So if the salary is between this, yes, we will consider the next factor or the next attribute. Office is near home, yes, then you will check. And if it is no, then you simply decline the offer. Then provides the cab facility. If the salary is between this, office is near home, and it is providing the cab facility, so we accept the offer. And again, if the salary is between this and it's providing cab facility, office is near home, but it is not providing the cab facility, we decline the offer. So you have to decide upon these splitting attributes. This is the splitting attribute. This is the second splitting attribute that you have to find. This is the third splitting attribute that you have to find out, on the basis of which you will keep splitting your data set at each turn, at each iteration. And how you will split, how will you decide it? That will be decided on the basis of these values that you obtain of information gain and entropy, and or another measure that can be used for finding out the impurity or the purity of the data set is the Gini index, right? So and these leaves basically are the classes. For example, here there are two classes only, that the offer will be accepted or rejected. So these leaves, everywhere you have the leaves, you see that you will have only the target attribute here. So this is how your decision tree functions. Then we have the concept of random forest. After decision tree, you have random forest, which can also be used for increasing the accuracy of the system as compared to your decision tree. Random forest or random decision forest is an ensemble classifier that operates by constructing multiple decision trees. So forest we know is a collection of trees. So here we are talking about decision tree. So random forest is a collection of decision trees, right? So the decision of the majority of trees is chosen by random forest as the final decision. What we are doing here is, right, what we are doing here is, we have a data set, say, which is having 20 attributes, What I do is that I select some of the relevant attributes out of it. Say I select 10 attributes from it, some 10 attributes from it, and build a decision tree in the same way which I built there in the previous slide. Right? I build a decision tree and I get a certain output out of it. This. Similarly, now I take the remaining 5 attributes. I take 5 attributes and build another decision tree out of it using the same method which I told you before. You get certain output out of that decision tree. Then you build a third decision tree using the last 5 attributes, because in all we had 20 attributes. 10 I took in the first one, second one I took 5, and the last one I am taking the remaining 5. So I build a next decision tree out of it and I get certain output which I call as the output 3. Now what we do in the random, so these are 3 decision trees that you have formed out of a given data set. So for a given data set, you can consider different attributes to build different decision trees. So what will happen is that there will be no biasing of this attributes will be there. Since you are giving preference to all the, it can be the case that the first 10 attributes that we are taking, out of those attributes, some 2 I am taking from one set, from this set only, and 3 I am taking from. That means there can be intersection of the attributes in the subsets that we are considering, right? And we get certain outputs out of this decision tree. Then how do we make the classification? The output which is generated by the majority of the decision tree is usually the output of the random forest, and that is the best output or the optimal output, you can say. For example, in this the first decision tree generates apple as an output, the second one generates mango as an output, the third one also generates apple as an output. So the majority of the decisions are on the this on the or on this fruit, that is the apple, and you have only one vote for, say, mango. So we go with the majority decision, and this will be the final decision, and that will be the classified, the whatever input that we have given will be classified as this apple. So this is how your random forest function as a collection of the decision tree. We build independent decision tree. These methods, random forest is basically an ensemble based technique. Nowadays, mainly ensemble techniques are being used for better accuracy, in which we can use hybrid approaches. Hybrid approaches in the sense that we do not make use of a single prediction algorithm or single classification algorithm. Instead, what we can do is that we can make a group of, we can apply 2 to 3 algorithms and or apply hybrid approach, and in order to generate the final output, so that the results that we are getting are much more optimal as compared to those that we'll be getting by applying just a single algorithm. And then you have even though decision trees are convenient and easily implemented, they lack accuracy. They work effectively with the training data set that was used to them, but they are not very practical, and this arises because of the problem of overfitting. What does overfitting mean? Overfitting basically means that your algorithm will work very well on the training data set that you have given to it, but as soon as and it gets adapted, so much adapted to that training set, that when you give a new test set, or then when you give a certain new unseen tuple for prediction or classification, it is not able to perform that better, or as it can work on the training data. So this problem of overfitting usually occurs in the decision trees. In order to overcome this problem of overfitting, we make use of this random forest. There is one variation of random forest which is referred to as bagging. In bagging, what we do is that here, as I have told you, that we consider subset of attributes. We consider subset of attributes and make decision tree on those attributes, on the basis of those attributes. Whereas in bagging, what we'll be doing is that we will take, supposing I have a test train data set which is having, say, 1000 tuples. So I may split this data set into several parts. Right? Like I can have 300 tuples for the first data set, 200 in the next, and then remaining 400 in the next, and 100 in the next. So this is how I can make 4 decision trees by splitting this data set into 4 parts. And then make different decision trees, and then depending upon the output of those decision trees or the forest, we make certain prediction, and this concept is known as bagging. It is a variation of random forest only. It reduces the variation in prediction by combining the result of multiple decision trees on different samples of the data set. This is the same data set split into various parts, that becomes the concept of bagging. And when we talk about the same data set being split into different sets of attributes and the decision tree being built, then that becomes the concept of your random forest. I hope this difference is clear to you. Then the next and very less used concept is the decision stump. Decision stumps are basically trees of level 1. They are basically trees of level 1, and they can be built only on one this attribute, on the basis of only one attribute. So they do not perform uh, a better classification. For example, this is an example which has been taken from the iris dataset, which is the data set of a flower which has attributes like petal width, sepal width, and petal width, and the petal height, and sepal width and the sepal height. On the basis of that, you have to predict the species of this flower. So if the petal width is greater than 1.75, it is the iris versicolor, it is the iris virginica plant. If it is no, it is the iris versicolor plant. It is a machine learning model which is consisting of only one level decision tree. So you have predictions which are being made on the basis of a single attribute. Therefore, it will not be as accurate as compared to your um, simple decision tree or your random forest or your bagging process. Then we have support vector machines, which is another form of classification algorithm. It is highly preferred as it by many, as it produces significant accuracy with less computation power. SVM boasts for classification regression tasks. Objective is to find a hyperplane in an n-dimensional space where n is the number of features that distinctly classifies the data points. Now, in SVM, what we do is that, supposing that these data points are given to you, right? What we do is that we have to build up a hyperplane here, which will divide the data set into two distinct classes. Now, here it is a very you can say easy example that has been taken up by me. The points are clearly divisible into two different classes, the red class and this blue class, right? So you have to find out a hyperplane which will classify the elements into two different classes. They are as you can clearly see that this, in this hyperplane, above on the above this hyperplane you have all the red elements, and below this hyperplane you have all the blue elements which are there, right? Then these vectors, while designing the hyperplane, what you have to keep in mind is that this margin should be as maximum as possible. How this margin is decided? This margin is decided based upon the support vectors. Support vectors basically are the points which are closest to the hyperplane. So you can see that this distance, and this distance. So there are 3 points here which are closest to this hyperplane of class 1. So these are the support vectors corresponding to class 1. And the support vectors, these 2 points are these 2 blue points are the support vectors for class 2, as they are the nearest point to this hyperplane. They are the nearest points to this particular hyperplane. So these support vectors. So these two are support vectors. These 2 blue points are support vectors for class 1. These 3 red points are support vectors for the other class, right? So you have to optimize this. You have to maximize this distance or the margin which occurs between the support vectors, and then you build a hyperplane between this, which will exactly classify your different points, different classes. This is how your support vector machine operates. Now, what will happen, that this is a easy example in which we have taken a two-dimensional database. So if in case your this data points are non-linear in nature, then what we do is that we can make use of certain kernel functions in order to convert the domain, of the point, so that they can be easily classified into two or more different classes. It depends upon the question in hand that how many classes are there in which you have to divide the points. This is how the support vector machine operates. Then there's an easy algorithm after it, which is called as linear regression. Now, this linear regression is generally used for, there is linear regression also, which I have not mentioned here. You have the polynomial regression, right? So linear and polynomial regression are basically used when we are talking about continuous variable. Continuous variable, an example, simple example of linear regression could be that supposing you know the area of the property and you know the location of the property and certain other features of the property on the basis of which you have to predict its price. So in that case, you can use the algorithm for linear regression. So here again, you have certain variables, certain independent variables and certain dependent variables. So if I talk about the area of the property or the price of the property, so the price of the property is dependent upon the area and the location of the property. So area and location become what? They become your dependent variable, where the price becomes your dependent variable and area and location are your independent variable. So when we are talking about linear regression, you just have one independent variable on which the value of the dependent variable depends. So you can form an equation like this, that y is equal to mx plus c, where you know that m is called as the slope, rate of change of y with respect to rate of change of x, and c is referred to as the intercept. Supposing we are given the number of years of experience of an employee and we have to predict the salary of the employee. So this is another example of linear regression. So you have to predict. This red line is the linear regression line that we have formed, we can form by means of the equation that we have given from the data set that is given to us. We can easily find out the value of m and c using the method of least squares. Using the method of least squares, it is easy to find the value of these coefficients m and c, and you can derive easily the equation y is equal to mx plus c. So once this equation has been derived for any particular given value of x, so if the number of years of experience is given, you can easily find out what will be the salary of the employee. Or if you can say that the area of the property is given, you can easily find out what the price of the property will be once this equation has been determined. So this is the graphical representation, and you can see here that it is not necessary that it will make 100% accurate predictions. It will make near to accurate predictions, but 100% correct predictions are not possible, because it is very rare that we get 100% accuracy for any algorithm, right? So these green points on this line, these are the correct predictions which are being made. These points which are lying above this line or below this line, there is a slight variation which can be referred to as epsilon, or it is called as a residual error between the predicted value and the actual value. So what our aim is that we have to minimize the sum of the square of these errors. MSE, mean squared error, we have to minimize as much as possible when we are talking about this linear regression, right? Then we have logistic regression. Now this logistic regression is basically, as the name says, although it is logistic regression, yet it is not basically a regression algorithm. It is a classification algorithm. It is used for classification. It is used to estimate discrete values, binary values like 0, 1, yes, no, based on the given set of independent variables. It predicts the probability of occurrence. Since its values lies in the range of 0 to 1, so it will predict, in a way, it will predict that whether the probability of the occurrence of a class is 0 or 1, whether it will occur or not occur. This is how your logistic regression functions. Then these are the various, this is the confusion matrix that we used for evaluating the accuracy of any classification algorithm. You have the actual classes here, and then you have the predicted classes, right? Here you can see if the class is C1 and C1, the actual class is C1 and the predicted is also C1. That means true positives. You will have the class C1 and it predicted as not C1. The actual class was C1 and it was predicted as not C1. That means a false negative has been detected, right? Then the class was not C1 and it has been detected to be C1. That means a false positive has been detected. The class was not C1 and a not C1 has been detected by the predicted by your algorithm also. That means a true negative has been detected. So this is your confusion matrix TP, FN, FP and TN and P and N, right? So this example, the same example which I had shown you there, the bias computer is equal to yes or bias computer no, yes or no. How many correct predictions are made? How many wrong predictions are made? So you can see here that true positive and true negatives are basically the correct predictions which are being made by your algorithm, right? And these are the false predictions which are being made by your algorithm. This diagonal represents the false predictions being made by your algorithm. So there are certain terms which are used in order to measure the accuracy of this algorithm. The accuracy can be measured by these formula TP plus TN upon all. Then error rate will be 1 minus accuracy. Then you have precision. That means what percentage of tuples that a classifier labeled as positive are actually positive. Then recall is completeness. That means what percentage. So on the basis of these measures, then two other measures you have, that is sensitivity and specificity, which are used on the basis of the values which you get for these numbers. You can decide upon how accurate your classifier is. If the accuracy is in the desired range, it is so good, and you can use it further for the remaining predictions, for making predictions. However, if the accuracy is low enough, in that case what you need to do is that you need to train your machine more with more amount of data so that it gives you the desired amount of accuracy. So this is one more algorithm is left in the supervised learning, which is artificial neural network. It is also a supervised learning algorithm. So just like human brain has neurons for passing information, similarly, neural network has also nodes to perform the same task. Nodes basically here are mathematical functions. You have to activate these nodes by means of activation functions which are there in order to make certain predictions or make certain classifications. Now, a neural network or artificial neural network are modeled as human brain. So this is the structure of the human brain, right? The human brain has mind to think and analyze any task in a particular situation, but the machine does not have a mind. So for this purpose, artificial neural network was designed as a neural network, and it is made up of perceptrons. You can see that there are certain inputs that we are giving, IN1, 2 till N, inputs that we are giving to the machine, and we expect certain output of this machine. The following diagram represents the general model of ANN, which is inspired by the biological neuron. It is also called as the perceptron. And these are the inputs. And if we talk about n-dimensional dataset, that means it has n features into it. Here, however, it has n plus 1 features and one bias is introduced over here, right? Then what we do is that we assign certain weights to these inputs on the basis of their importance, and we find out the weighted sum of this, which is shown here by means of the summation b plus x0 w0 plus x1 w1, and then on this summation we apply the activation function. Now, what is this activation function? Activation function can be of, there are various types of activation functions actually which can be used, right? You have the threshold activation function, sigmoid activation function, or the hyperbolic tangent function, and the ReLU function, based upon the different instances in which, or certain applications which you have to work upon. You can take up one of the activation function and accordingly design your neural network for it, right? So this my time is going to be up, the designated time. However, I am left with the unsupervised learning algorithms. So what should I do? Should I proceed or unsupervised learning algorithm? If you want, I can give a detail, wind it up in 5-10 minutes so that at least we are done with the main algorithm, the supervised and the unsupervised learning algorithm.
Ma'am, no issue. You can continue for next 5 or 10 minutes.
All right.
Ma'am, if you want, you can continue with the slide.
Yes, I'll continue. I'll just wind up with the unsupervised learning algorithms.
So,
Now, unsupervised learning algorithms, as I have told you, that it does not have labeled data. We usually have the unlabeled data. So the two most prominent algorithms which are used in unsupervised learning are the k-means clustering and the association rule. So when we talk about the clustering, it is basically a type of unsupervised learning method. It's the task of dividing the population or data points into a number of groups such that data points in the same groups are more similar to the data. That means what it means is that if I divide, say this data set is given to us, a clustering algorithm is applied to it. What it does is, based upon the features of this data set, it divides it into three parts. The first one consists of apples and then pears and then strawberries, right? So what is the optimal property of the cluster is that all elements which are lying within a particular cluster, they should have identical properties. So here it's a very simple example in which you can easily identify or differentiate that we are talking about a huge data set which is given to us in which you have certain amount of features, right? So in that case, the elements which are being put in the same cluster should have identical properties, whereas if we compare elements of different clusters, so for example, if I compare element of this cluster with the elements of this cluster, in that case the dissimilarity should be here, the dissimilarity should be high, whereas the similarity should be high within the elements of the same cluster. If I compare this cluster with this cluster, again the dissimilarity value should be very high when we talk about the clustering algorithm, or whether a clustering algorithm is performing good enough or not. So for that purpose, these are the various areas where your clustering algorithms can be applied. Marketing, it can be used to characterize and discover customer segments for marketing purpose. So based upon the interest of the people, we can apply marketing techniques to sell a particular product to particular segment of a customer based upon their interest, based upon the preferences given by them. Then biology, it can be used for classification among different species of plants and animals, libraries, insurance, earthquake studies. Based upon the how this helps, how this can be done in earthquake studies, by learning the earthquake affected areas, we can determine which are the most dangerous zones, where in which areas the earthquake has prominently occurred in the past few years. On the basis of that, you can make certain clusters of the areas and make them as uh, and you can make them as danger zones or something like that. So anomaly detection, like means you have a certain set. Most common one is that if I want to detect a fraud which is occurring in the credit card fraud detection is one kind of anomaly which can be detected by means of the cluster analysis. That based upon the certain you can say features or certain steps which are being performed by customers in an anonymous way or not in a routine way, we can analyze certain anomalies and detect whether they are fraud or not. Then recommendation systems like Amazon and Netflix, most of this, almost it has been the research shows that about 75 to 80% of the customers are watch the recommended movies on the Netflix. Watch the recommended movies on the Netflix, because once we watch a movie, automatically next time we open up Netflix, it gives certain recommendations of the movies. So the recommendations given are so enough that 80% of the population is following those recommendations and they are watching those movies. So such strong recommendation systems are built up by these companies. So in clustering, I will discuss the partition-based clustering, which makes use of the k-means clustering technique, and which is the most prominently used technique. In the k-means clustering technique, just like in k-nearest algorithm, which we had used for classification, here also the value of k will be given to you. For a given data point, set of data points, what we do is that we can take any, supposing the value of k given to you is 2. So I take up any of the two data points and make them as the center points or the mean points. Then I evaluate the distance of all the points. Here you can see that this point and this point I have taken as the center point. Next step, what I do is that I calculate the distance, Euclidean distance, Manhattan, Minkowski, any distance you can use. You calculate the distance of this point from this point and from the second mean. We can see that the closer it is closer to this, that means it will lie in this cluster, right? Second, what we do, second point also, we find the distance from this point, this center, and this center. To whichever it is the nearest, we put it in that cluster, right? For the third point, fourth point, that means for all the blue points, light and dark blue points you are seeing, you will find the distance from these 2 points, orange and red, and to whichever distance they are the nearest, we will put them in those clusters. So this is the first set of clusters which have been formed after the first iteration, that these 5 points are lying in one group and these points are lying in the other group. Now what we do is that once the first set of clusters have been formed, what we do is that we find the mean of these clusters and consider it to be the new mean. And you find out the mean of this set of cluster points and consider it to be the new mean. Again, what you do is that you find the distance of all these points from the new mean points, and whichever they are nearer to, you form a new set of clusters. So you can see that now previously there were 3, 4, 5, 6 points over here. Now there are 7 points in this cluster and there are 5 here. So there's a change in this cluster. This set of clusters form in this set of clusters. So again we will repeat the same process, and this process will be repeated till the time we get identical set of clusters. Each time we will find out a new mean from the clusters that we have obtained, and we will segregate the elements on the basis of the points they are nearest to, right? And this process will be repeated until identical set of clusters is obtained in the consecutive iterations. This is how your k-means clustering algorithm functions. Then you have density-based clustering, which is basically used for detecting areas which are danger zones or which are highly populated, right? So they are here clusters are made based on the density or made based on the population. Then you have hierarchical clustering, which is of two types, divisive and agglomerative. What we do in this divisive, this clustering follows a top-down approach, whereas agglomerative clustering follows a bottom-up approach for clustering the elements. And there is certain they are hierarchy based in the way that they are adopting certain features of their parents. This is how clustering functions. Another major algorithm which is used is association rule mining, right? Association rule mining is another form of clustering algorithm, and it is majorly employed in the market basket analysis. Market basket analysis means that suppose I talk about a big mart, if I talk about Walmart, you can see that there are plenty of items arranged. So it is not haphazardly they are placing the elements anywhere, right? So they have to devise certain techniques by means of which they should place the elements or the items in a way so that people buy maximum number of items. For example, if I buy a laptop, there's a high probability that I will buy a printer along with it, I will buy an antivirus along with it. So one of the way is that I place all the points, all the things which are related to the laptop near to each other, right? Second way is that if I buy a laptop, there's a high probability that I will buy the antivirus also. So I buy a laptop from one end, antivirus is placed on the other end of the say mart. So and in between you place items which are not related to the laptop. So once you view those items, there's a high probability that you'll be tempted to buy those items. So how this arrangement of items should be done? This is referred to as market basket analysis and association rule mining, which makes use of the main a priori is a technique which is used to place these items in a manner that they optimize the sales of the organization, right? So here you have certain terms associated with it, with the association rule mining. Association rule is also uh, referred in terms of the if and else statement. That means if A, then B. If a person will buy laptop, he will buy antivirus. So if A, then B. So if is referred to as antecedent, and B is referred to as the consequent, and then you have these measures which are important in order to run the a priori algorithm. You have support and confidence and lift. Now support is the frequency of A, or how frequently an item appears in a data set. It is defined as a fraction of a transaction T that contains the item set X. So if we are given 5 transactions, for example, you can consider this example in which you have been given certain number of transactions, right? And in this transaction, a person buys item A, C, and D, B, C, E, A, B, C, C, so on, B, E. This set is given to you, right? So how many times, if I have to find the support of A, what it means is that A has, what is the frequency of A, and in how many transactions, out of how many transactions, how many times A has occurred. So A, 1, 2 times it has occurred. How many transactions are there? 4 transactions there. So support count for A is 2 by 4, that is 0.5. Similarly, I can find out the support for B, C, D, and E, which are the items which are being bought. Then you have the confidence. Confidence basically correlates the items with each other. That if I buy X, what is the probability that I will buy Y? So confidence of XY is mainly the frequency of buying X along with Y, and the frequency upon the total frequency of buying X. So if I say the confidence of AB, so what is the confidence of AB? It means the number of times A and B occur together. Number of times A, or if I say BE, because it is occurring together. What is the confidence of BE? So BE is occurring together how many times? 2 times upon the confidence of B. This is how you find out the confidence. And lift, it is the strength of any rule which can be defined as support of XY and upon support of X into support of Y. And this is how you interpret the value of lift. So when you are running a priori algorithm, the value of the minimum support count will be given to you in the question, that the minimum number of items times the item should be brought is this much. So in this question, it is given to you as 2. So there are 4 transactions. What I do is that in the first step, first scan, I list down all these items along with the frequency or the support of these items. So A is occurring 2 times, B is occurring 3 times, C is occurring 4 times. Delete all the items which are having a value less than the minimum support count. So I delete D from here, and you are left with this, right? So this is all one item set which are satisfying the minimum support. In the next step, what I do is that I take the just 5 minutes, Akansha, this is the last slide. I take the join of this set with this set itself. Like just like you take joins in DBMS, you take join of this set. It becomes A means A only. You take AB, AC, AE, then you take BC and BE. I take the joins. Similarly for C, with C also you take the join, with E also you take. Write down all the item sets. And then what you do is that you write the support against each. How many times A and B occur together? A, B occur together only 1 time, so I've written 1 time. AC occur how many times? 1 time and 1 time, 2 times, so I've written 2 times. AE occur. Similarly, I have written the support for each and every item. Again, I delete the elements which are having value less than the minimum support. So these 2 rows are deleted and you get this. Again, what you do is, since there is a change in this and this, you take the join of this AC and BC join like this. You take the join of this table with itself. You get this, and eliminate those rows which have value less than the minimum support count. So how many you are left with only BC